For our next presentation, I'm really delighted to introduce Victoria Murray CEnv, who's an Associate Director at Tetra Tech. Tetra Tech are a multi-disciplinary consultancy, and Victoria has worked in the waste and resource management sector for 16 years across a range of businesses, including an MRF operator, waste collection service providers, and for local government. Victoria's current role is in supporting local authorities and the service providers to review and procure frontline environmental services. And she's going to be discussing the challenges and opportunities of household plastic waste recycling. Hi, Victoria, over to you.
Hi, can I just check which screen can you see, the full presentation or the one with the notes?
I can see the full presentation, I think, with plastic bottles.
Okay, great. I'll get started. Okay, lovely. So just, I've had a brief introduction, so that's me. But Tetra Tech do lots of things in the waste management sector. So we cover planning, environmental permitting, compliance, and then in my area, I support predominantly local authorities and their service providers in reviewing and procuring environmental services, including waste and recycling collections and processing. So I'm going to be just talking a bit about, I suppose, the challenges of local authority plastics recycling at the moment. So obviously we know that plastics is a global concern, and we had a very brief conversation before the call started when we were checking the technology, just saying that actually we're kind of lacking processing capacity within the UK, and there's still a lot of our plastic waste that's generated that isn't recycled or that is sent abroad for processing. So there will be advice to local authorities on consistent collections. I'm sure lots of you have probably seen bits and pieces in the media about wish cycling, that's been in the press this week, and also, or last week, and also around simplifying collections to make it easier for residents to understand what can and can't be recycled. And that goes back to Catherine's point around, you know, the different labelling on packaging, and that's all going to become hopefully a bit more straightforward, so people know what they can recycle and it's consistent and easy across local authorities regardless of where they live. So at the moment, some local councils, you can recycle, you know, a full range of plastics, including pots, tubs and trays, plastic bottles and film, whereas in other local authorities, including the one in which I live, I can only recycle plastic bottles at the curbside, and if I want to recycle anything else, I'll have to find a different outlet to take that to. So in terms of local authority recycling, so the government set a 65% recycling target. And at the moment, looking at that and how that applies to plastics in particular, 82% of local authorities in England collect plastic pots, tubs and trays at the curbside. I think all of them collect plastic bottles, but only 10% collect plastic film. And from 2027, it will be a requirement for local authorities to collect film. There's a deposit return scheme, which again has been in the press quite a lot this week and is being debated in Scottish Parliament today, around the differences in opinion between the Scottish Government and the central government around the inclusion or not of glass. So England came out saying that we won't be including glass in that scheme. Scotland and Wales, on the other hand, said they would be including glass. Now, under the single market agreement, basically the central government has said that Scotland can't collect glass. So they're debating it today because they're saying that, you know, a big underpinning of how the service will work will be that it includes glass as well as plastic bottles and drinks cans. So the deposit return scheme will essentially be for single-use drinks containers. People will pay a small deposit when they purchase the items, and it will be per item, including individual bottles within multi-packs. And it's likely to be around 20 pence. And then you get that 20 pence back when you return the bottle to a reverse vending machine, typically at the point at which you purchased it. So back to the supermarket, to kind of a collection system. And it's similar to systems that operate elsewhere in Europe. Consistent collections that I've mentioned, those are coming, and we're waiting for the government to publish greater detail on what that might mean and how many different sort of types of collection systems will be permitted and what funding might be available to support that. And then in addition to that, we've got the extended producer responsibility scheme, which is coming in from the next financial year, so from 23 24 financial year, and that will, or is intended to cover the full net cost of recovery of packaging waste. So the way they're currently working out is they're doing lots of different modelling to work out what those costs are, and then essentially local authorities will receive some sort of credit per tonne, which should cover that cost of recycling and or disposal. So what this might mean is that producers will shift the types of packaging that they produce, because the more recyclable or more easily recyclable the product that you're producing is, the less the producer will pay in terms of modulated fee to place that item on the market. And then conversely, the less recyclable it is, the more they pay. So there might be an increase in things like take-back schemes and reusable packaging to, for producers to reduce their costs, because essentially all these costs that they will incur in terms of the modulated fees will be passed directly to consumers. Oh. Slides are frozen. Oh, there we go. So this graph is just showing, so you can just see the scale of the difference between who currently collects plastic bottles, which is kind of the top portion, that's everybody in England. Then your pots, tubs and trays, so your yogurt pots and those kind of things, and then the plastic film as well. Films are particularly difficult material because it can often be contaminated with food waste, and then you get an issue where that causes problems for other materials within the stream. For example, if you've got a commingled collection where you're collecting paper and cardboard at the same time as other materials such as plastic. So next, we're going to go on to some things that local authorities are doing to kind of help this, aside from their frontline collection systems. So one area is in introducing plastic-free initiatives. So as we probably know, many local authorities have declared a climate emergency, but fewer have produced a sort of roadmap or a clear plan in terms of how they're going to get from where they are now to a net zero position. And part of this is reducing the plastics that they use within their offices and council buildings or within their support services. So this is things like taking away single-use cups, drink stirrers, straws, and so on. But then also from October 2023, the UK government is banning single-use plastic plates, trays, bowls, or the full list is there, you can see. And this will apply to businesses, including takeaways and food vendors and hospitality industry. So it's going to be quite interesting to see how that feeds through, how well we adjust to that quite significant change. And then we've got plastic-free campaigns that local authorities have run as sort of behaviour change campaign to reduce this waste stream. So I've got a quick case study here for Cheshire East / Answer. So Answer is their wholly owned local authority company that's operated by Cheshire East to deliver their waste services. So they launched a behaviour change campaign in 2018, which was branded Life with Less Plastic. It involved lots of practical advice using social media. They produced a community toolkit, which people could download, that gave practical advice on how to reduce the use of plastics. They also trained some waste reduction volunteers that could give individuals advice and businesses on how they can reduce plastic waste where possible. And then they looked at eliminating it from council buildings, and then also using kind of shock statistics as part of their behaviour change campaign to kind of get people to understand what the real scale of the problem was. And then Wilmslow, which is a town, village within the Cheshire East area, was awarded a plastic-free community status by Surfers Against Sewage in 2019. Another area that's seen increasing in focus is, rather than just recycling, I suppose, plastic into pellets and then into new plastic bottles, is looking at different ways in which we could recycle plastics. So here are a few examples. So one is microwave technology. One such company doing this is Pyrowave, and they're using that to recycle polystyrene. There's also a number of companies looking at different types of chemical recycling. Some of those are looking at producing, or essentially breaking down the plastic into its hydrocarbons so that those can then be recycled. And Murray Technology is looking to become the world leader in that area. And then there are a number of organisations also do plastic to fuel. So there were Suez used to have a plant, or they do have a plant, but I think it's mothballed at the moment, in Avonmouth, which is doing plastic to fuel. And then there's another company which is called Plastic to Oil, who are actually developing a new patent pending process, which is looking at turning plastics into fuel. So the challenges for collections. So as I mentioned, from 2027, all local authorities will be required to collect film. This is a particular challenge because lots of our systems aren't set up to collect this material at the curbside particularly. It's quite lightweight and voluminous, which makes it a bit difficult to collect. And if you're using a materials recycling facility to separate the streams, it's also quite challenging to extract from other materials using a mechanised means, although possible. From October 2025, pending what happens today around DRS, but they said that's the earliest that might be introduced, and that will include plastic bottles as that's currently drafted. Material consistency, we've been waiting for this for quite a long time, and the government keeps pushing back the announcement, but we're expecting something any day soon. The impacts of extended producer responsibility, will that create a shift in producers in terms of how they package their materials and what products they use to make that packaging? And will it also encourage behaviour change? So, for example, if a product that you normally buy that comes in a composite product, such as a tube that holds crisps, the price of that might go up because it's more challenging to recycle. That might then change people's behaviour from a cost perspective as much as anything else. And then we've also got some behaviour change around adapting to DRS, because that's a different way of dealing with that material from your household. You will have to take it back to the point of purchase. And I think I just saw a comment in the chat come up around this, but food waste contamination, and particularly around film. So there's been a recent study around sort of linked to this, which is around how we use recycled plastics and the safety of using those for food use. So there's been some concerns raised about polyethylene, and this is because of the chemicals leaching out of the plastic effectively into the food products, and these materials and chemicals have been associated with things such as hormone changes and types of cancer, and the impacts are not yet known. So that's another sort of barrier to recycling, is really understanding, are the recycled materials safe for food use? At the moment, it's actually cheaper to produce new plastics than it is to recycle existing plastic in a lot of cases. And currently, the price of virgin plastic is quite low, and it's often linked to kind of the oil price and so on, which again makes it more challenging on the recycling side, because if you haven't got other incentives, then that makes it more difficult. The tax around the recycling content for new plastic packaging should help that to some extent, because it should drive the market for recycled rather than virgin materials. But at the present moment, it's still cheaper on the virgin plastics. Question system design and sourcing technology. So rolling out film collections, because of the nature of the material, might be quite challenging for some local authorities, and it's also getting that messaging right to residents around what you can recycle and what you can't, what counts as film and what isn't film. Things like plastic film that's used to wrap food could potentially be contaminated, and that causes problems. And also things like crisp packets cause a lot of confusion because people aren't sure if they're plastic or if they're foil. Older MRFs, so if you're using an older materials recycling facility as an authority, they can't segregate film. And then it's also looking at some companies are pushing into, and I've seen quite a lot of this on LinkedIn actually, around creating new types of packaging, which could potentially result in more waste rather than less. So they're trying to move away from glass and plastic and instead using things like cardboard, which is plastic lined. But then the question is, you've created another product that's like a Tetra Pak. How do you actually recycle that? And then the further challenge of compostable plastics, because they're actually only compostable in an industrial process, and we don't want them in the recycling plastics collection scheme. So there's some obstacles to be overcome. But that's it from me. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Really thought-provoking stuff from both. Just a couple of questions. First, to Catherine around, there's quite a lot of chat around hygiene, Catherine, there, and I'm conscious that in the town where I live, there's a zero waste shop and things are loose, like one of the pictures you showed. But do you think that this has become more difficult because of COVID and people's reluctance to not buy things loose, etc.? You know, is that an issue that you think is going to be hard to bring back after things like COVID?
Hygiene and food safety are a huge thing. They're definitely not a barrier because they're needed, especially with the likes of Natasha's law with allergens and pieces of ensuring that we're not cross-contaminating.
Yeah,
I think you're right. The reuse shops, it's understanding that you've got to empty a whole one of those cereal containers first. You can't just keep topping it up.
Yeah,
it's got to be kind of controlled. And I think people will have that COVID piece in the back of their minds of, oh, is it safe? Is it clean? Has someone kind of sneezed all over that, or that aspect? And it's also that washing of the containers that you bring yourself, of ensuring that they are, so for example, meat, it's unlikely that, yes, you can take in your, and I think you can do it with most supermarkets, you can take in a reusable container in to get your meat from the counter put in, but it's ultimately then down to that hygiene level of how have you washed it properly. And I think the two go hand in hand with that safety message of ensuring, if you are using reusable containers, that they are correctly washed, because otherwise it is going to turn into that health piece. And there will always be, and to Victoria's point, for the hospitality single-use plastic removal, there will always be a need for single-use plastics in hospitality from a food to go, pre-packaged sandwiches and things point of view, because of that hygiene element. If you've got to keep it fresh, you've got to ensure people haven't kind of had their fingers all over it, and to keep that fresh, because hygiene is a big thing, and the changes in allergen law in the UK and kind of people's perception is something that's going to play onto that.
But it feels there's probably areas that are really complex, and perhaps the efforts should be on those that the easier wins maybe is a feeling here, isn't it? Victoria, you briefly mentioned wish cycling.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people are one of those, which means you sort of put things into the recycling, hoping it will be dealt with at the other end. I've been to recycling plants and I've seen how it works. I think there's a debate here, and I'm going to challenge you a little bit here, because I need convincing actually that the responsibility is for me to choose where to put things, and actually by making it awkward for the supply chain to deal with, or the council to deal with, you're actually forcing them to look at investment, to look at changing of the ways they're doing things. The alternative is to just accept you can't do any more. Actually, the one organization, the one part that can do more is that waste management service. They're the ones that can invest in a machine that might be developed in another part of the world, or it might be something they've been thinking about investing in. And yeah, it might be difficult, but I'm pretty sure they've got a better chance of recycling more than I have. So, how do you respond to that challenge that actually, keep sticking it in there, because then they'll sort it better?
An interesting one. I think the big challenge is the cost as much as anything else. So some of these materials have, they don't have a market value. So when you're talking about films, to recycle those, it's a cost, not an income. So that's part of the challenge to start with. And also, if you've got a proportion of that that's very low quality, chances are a portion of that, it won't be recycled. So the difficulty with materials that people put in hoping they can be recycled, one is that they can have a detrimental impact on other materials that they are already collecting, just because the sorting technology isn't there to segregate them. So for example, film is a classic example because it's very lightweight, and as it goes through a sorting plant, it can follow the paper because that's what it kind of gets stuck to, and then it ends up in the paper, and then you've got an issue at the paper recycling, the paper mill, of extracting that. It lowers the value of the paper, and if you can get it out, chances are it will go to RDF because it won't be segregated as its own separate stream. It will just come out with everything we didn't want that people put in anyway, and it all goes into one pile, which then in all likelihood will go to RDF or some form of energy from waste. So I think,
are you aware of any pressure that as this continues to happen and is likely to continue to happen, that actually it does drive more investment in machinery and sorting? Film might be an exception, and maybe there's a clear message that we need to adopt and spread, but perhaps there's other products that look the same, a plastic tube here and a plastic tube there. Do you feel that my rather rebellious approach driving investment by kind of, do you feel that I'm completely barking up the wrong tree, and that pressure's not felt at the recycling centres?
I'd say not in my experience, and that's usually because the cost of installing such equipment and particularly retrofitting it. So if you're designing a new facility now, so for example, there's a collection of authorities, including Coventry, I think it's about 5 or 6 of them, who are building their own state-of-the-art MEF that they're building now, which will have all of this technology built in, and it will have been forward planned and considered. The difficulty is if you've got a facility, I mean, the local authority area I live in, we can only collect 4 materials for recycling.